Hey everyone, welcome and thank you for joining us for the second of the two webinar information sessions for the Charles E. Kaufman Foundation, a supporting organization of the Pittsburgh Foundation. Today, we'll be going over a lot of the information that you have available that's on the website. Please, use the chat to ask any questions that we'll be able to follow up, and then we'll have some time for question and answer at the end. Just for housekeeping purposes, wanted to let you know that auto captioning is being provided for today's event. If you'd like or to enable that caption feed, it's at the bottom, the button at the bottom of the desktop app in the settings sections or in your mobile devices. Questions will be accepted again via the chat and then addressed at the end of the presentation. You're automatically muted for the bulk of the presentation, though we'll take that function off just in case anyone's in an Eaton Park right now and want to make sure it doesn't get too noisy in case you unintentionally click the mute button, unmute. And if you're experiencing any technical difficulties, please just message Taryn Lumley, who's helping to coordinate the technology for the session in the chat as well. It's great to meet you. My name is Michael Jonas. I serve as the Vice President for Community Partnerships and Learning at the Pittsburgh Foundation. I've been here for about 10 years and I'm privileged to work with an amazing group, which I'll be introducing you to during the session today, to manage the Kaufman Foundation program in honor of and to meet the donor intent will of Mr. Kaufman himself. I'm a 55-year-old white male. I'm wearing a blue navy jacket, sort of with a white button-down collar, and behind me is I'm sort of in a conference room here at the Pittsburgh Foundation with an orange background. And I share that information with you as part of our disability and inclusion information, should anyone have any kind of visual impairments too. The Pittsburgh Foundation is honored to have been able to be put in a position to see through and honor Mr. Kaufman's amazing donor intent. The program was established in 2010 by Mr. Kaufman. He was a chemical engineer who was an avid outdoorsman, active member of the Western Pennsylvania Conservancy, also left money to the Conservancy directly himself that goes directly there. And he dreamt of being able to support the innovative pursuit of fundamental scientific questions in the disciplines of biology, chemistry, and physics, in those fundamental research areas. He's really interested in high risk, high novel, exciting research to help spark that in the state of Pennsylvania, modeled off of the Welch Foundation in Texas. One of his quotes is he could accomplish more through others than ever himself. And so he really wanted to help build a community of practice and work and focus that would be able to change the kind of research that happens in our region. Again, he said all it takes is a spark. The mission is to support, again, fundamental research in biology, chemistry, and physics. And the foundation distributes grants in three primary areas. One is in the new initiative area. Sorry, my screen is a little crowded here. In the new investigator area, new initiative area, and then also in the integrative research and education area as well. We have a great team here that works and is here to support you at all phases of this process. It'll introduce you to, and you can probably see them on your screen. I'm going to ask everyone to wave kind of when I say your name, but Carlos Guerrero is our consultant, scientific consultant at the University of Pittsburgh. This is his first year joining us, and he's been a rock star in helping to manage that scientific advisory side of the work that we're doing and helping to manage that work. Brittany Eltman is a program assistant here at the Pittsburgh Foundation in our department, who helps primarily a lot of the grants management, grant application, and application questions you might have along the way. Bree Casals is our assessment and learning associate here in the Pittsburgh Foundation, who has a bit more of a forward-facing role to the Kaufman Foundation. She's really taking the lead on developing a series of webinars to help reach out and engage you all as our community of practice. She's in the process of developing a newsletter that will be reaching out to you likely twice this year, hopefully 3 or 4 times next year, to share information about the SAB, the current research priorities, some of our key timelines, and also help develop and deepen our community of practice together. Again, I've been at the Pittsburgh Foundation for about 10 years and managed the Kaufman program. And then Dr. Graham Hatfill is the chair of the Scientific Advisory Board at the University of Pittsburgh. And Dr. Hatfill brings a wealth of experience and tremendous research expertise, and has been the advisory board chair for Kaufman since its inception in the beginning too. He oversees an advisory board of exceptional scientists that manage and review the grants and LOIs and make recommendations on funding that are consistent with Mr. Kaufman's guidelines and priorities. And then the overall program itself, because it's a supporting org of the Pittsburgh Foundation, is managed by a board of directors that I manage here at the Pittsburgh Foundation that lead to the broader programming potential changes in others. The leadership and board of the Pittsburgh Foundation, though, are ultimately accountable because as a supporting org for the work of the Kaufman Foundation. I'd say as we keep working, going through these slides, and please do use the chat to share your questions or a piece of paper. Don't forget them so that we can make sure to review and address any questions or concerns you might have. For the guidelines of the Kaufman Foundation program, wanted to go over really quickly for you, which again is available on the website. And we have a lot of information on our FAQ page that's on the Kaufman website as well, to please take a look at in case you don't get your questions answered during today, or if you don't see it there, you are always welcome to email Kaufman Apps, which is what we'll share with you later, to ask us questions as well. We're over communicators versus under communicators, so please don't hesitate to reach out. So I'll share with you kind of the two core programs for Kaufman versus the New Investigator and New Initiative, but also wanted to direct you to every year we publish the program grants that have been funded over the previous year. And you can see here from 2024, there's a link. You can find this information at the kaufman.pittsburghfoundation.org. This is a way to kind of see what kind of projects have been funded. Do they, how are they described? It might be a colleague of yours or others. So really encourage you to look to see what has been funded this year. And there's also links to previous years of funding as well. Before I move into the grant descriptions, anything from my team to jump in or share? Not yet, okay. So the New Investigator grants, they're designed to support innovative scientists in Pennsylvania as they transition in their academic position to becoming new investigators. These are more of the startup type, R21 type of awards, $150,000 split over 2 years, $75,000 a year. The proposals must examine fundamental science research questions that focus on core principles of biology, physics, or chemistry, or at the disciplinary intersection between those boundaries as well. Applied or clinical studies directly will not be supported. We realize that we've got a couple of questions that came in before the session about that boundary, and we'll be happy to talk with you at the end a little bit. But when you think about fundamental science, basic science, and others, really go with the most sort of traditional definition you're thinking of there, but really happy to hear your ideas as well. The eligibility criteria are those are investigators whose primary appointment is an institution of higher education in the state of Pennsylvania. That's an IRS code designation that's not interpretable. So got to be at an institution that supports education. Applicants must be U.S. citizens or lawful permanent residents at the time of the application deadline. Investigators must have one of the following: either a full-time tenure position, a tenure track appointment, so on that trajectory. We recently adopted the NIH guidelines as well to include independent research faculty appointments. So these are individuals who may not be on the tenure stream or tenure track, but they have evidence of and a history or institutional capacity for driving independent research in their labs. So these are not individuals who are or investigators that are working underneath a senior investigator implementing that research program, but really have the opportunity to build and develop their own research program. Applicants must have not yet successfully completed as a PI for a substantial independent NIH grant. So that would be the R01 or a high-level NSF grant or others, really the 5-year independent investigator award, and have obtained a terminal research degree or clinical degree in the last 10 years. And we did change that recently as well, if you've looked at Kaufman in the past, from 7 to 10 years, also to mirror the NIH guidelines. Given COVID and given life, there are a number of circumstances that have emerged, and we're also welcome to hear your ideas if you'd like to ask for an exemption from those guidelines. So that's the New Investigator program itself. For the New Initiative grants, these are a little higher level, institutional, collaborative. The goal is to stimulate and established investigators to work towards innovative collaborations among their fields. So these are investigators that may be at different institutions. They don't have to be, though. And provided that they provide a different approach that through this grant can be combined to address a new research initiative. It's always a little bit of art and science here. So this is people that may not, have just met in an airport and then decided to do research together. They may have done some work together in the past and others, but these are investigators that generally have not published 12 articles together, that have gotten outside grants together, things like that too. But this is an opportunity to take some really exciting new ideas between physics and chemistry or biology or textile sciences or others to come together and work together in a way that's really novel and life-changing. Proposals are required to examine, again, the same as the new investigator award, fundamental science questions at the core principles of biology, physics, and chemistry, or at the interdisciplinary boundary there. And we generally fund up to 4 awards at a maximum of $300,000 a year over 2 years. That's $150,000 a year. We recognize, just so you know, in reality, obviously it takes some time to get these grants moving forward. It is very common that we provide no cost extensions because of a variety of reasons. So just to let you know that we're not rigid on this timeline, given that the science is moving forward and that the justification for the work that's happening is really clear. The eligibility criteria here is that there must be at least 2 investigators identified on the research project. The principal and co-principal investigators must hold primary appointments, similar to the new investigator, at a higher education institution in the state of Pennsylvania. It is possible that you could hire or have a consultant from another institution that provides a very specific role, but for the co-PI and the PI, those are academic members that serve in Pennsylvania institutions. It's important to note that if you're thinking about leaving and you're interviewing for a job at Harvard, you might not want to apply here because you cannot take this grant with you and you cannot transfer it to someone in your institution, because that would not be the grant that the SAB reviewed and funded. So just be conscious of the sort of transitions. Other investigators should be identified as co-investigators beyond the PI alone. All the investigators must be United States citizens or lawful permanent residents. The same kind of tenure guideline or independent research faculty appointments are required here to be considered for a new initiative award. Really, this is information you can cover very quickly or share either unique elements of your position at your university or any of these guidelines in your LOI cover letter or information that's coming up soon, and Brittany will talk about the timeline. Investigators must reflect expertise in those 3 areas of fundamental science or integrated subspecialties, and the proposed research must be a new initiative and not just a little incremental step of one that's been going on and we want to take it one step further. Mr. Kaufman was really interested in really supporting some of those new novel, innovative stretches that people may not be able to take with more traditional funding resources. So we recognize that what's novel or new or experimental is a matter of interpretation. So help us understand in your materials how you define those steps as well. And then wanted to share with you information about the 3rd area of grant making under the Kaufman program, which is the Integrated Research and Education Grants Program. The goal is to fund rigorous fundamental research that's happening by investigators who also prioritize undergraduate training and engagement. So this isn't like a couple of students because it might be helpful. This is really meant to cultivate training and research opportunities at institutions, which are currently is an invite-only program, but as we've changed over the last year, as we're casting a very wide net and inviting most institutions throughout the state of Pennsylvania. These are proposals that are really targeted at not tier 1 research institutions in the state, but 2nd tier, more teaching-focused institutions, but to cultivate research there that would also have a strong education component to as well. And these are 2 awards in general with a maximum of $100,000 over 2 years at $50,000 a year. Wanted to share with you that the new investigator and new initiative grants do provide a 10% indirect rate as part of those. It's one of the exceptions that the Pittsburgh Foundation does allow. For the Integrated Research and Education Program, there is not an indirect rate, but it does provide, in lieu of that, an opportunity for summer funding for students and others. So it was found early on through lots of research that that was a really valuable complement given the undergraduate focus of the training as well. The eligibility criteria for the IREG program is that they have been invited to apply, which again, we've cast a really wide net. Investigators must have a primary appointment in an institute of higher education, same citizenship regulations. Faculty must be tenure tracked or independent researcher, with a given presence of evidence also that there's authentic engagement with undergraduates education at their institution. And investigators who've been previously awarded through the IREG program or have received funding from the Kaufman program are also not eligible. The nice thing about the Kaufman program, you now have our eligibility criteria. If you have a remarkable exception that you think is really unique, that's the value of being at a foundation and supporting Mr. Kaufman's wishes as a donor is share them with us, and we will see, and we promise to be honest and transparent with you through the approach. Any questions or comments from our team on the Kaufman team on this side before I move into some background? Awesome, thank you. And for all those listening, please make sure to keep your questions handy. Wanted to share with you some analysis that Bria Casales recently completed for us, which was really helpful. Was looking at both programs. A lot of people ask questions for program counts. How many people apply? How many grants? These are grant numbers of grants that came in between 2019 and 2023. You see the overall LOIs about 675, full proposal invites were 131, with leading to grants of about 40. For the new initiative and new investigator, you see very much the same trend, where it is competitive, but not as competitive as often the NIH guidelines as well. And we'll can share with you in the next slide are some disciplinary variation that you can see by chemistry, physics, and biology for new investigator and new initiative comparisons, where we see the highest numbers of conversion from LOI to grant being funded. We see for new initiative without any priority. These are just reflective hypothesis generating questions, where you see chemistry as being the highest with a fairly equal distribution overall, kind of balance, but going down to biology/chemistry. And then for new investigator, a much higher number of physics awards that have been funded, which also gives us a lot of thought and pause to understand, but with a really good distribution across the others as well. And in terms of measures of success, this is from a previous analysis we did that ended in 2019. So there's COVID and others. But Kaufman does a really wonderful job of finding exciting, innovative, impactful research. And you can see as a trajectory with an indice that we developed by grant dollars and publications that there's an upward trend slope for all of those who've been funded, with some standouts for different years, but really good people. And from the feedback that we've heard, investigators have all really benefited from the flexibility of funding and opportunity in their department to really pursue this work and make the most of the Kaufman funding as well. In terms of overall performance by discipline, we saw the highest level of performance and grants follow through with physics and astronomy, chemistry, genetics, and biology, and then chemistry specific as well. And then material science at about the same at 10.8%. There is no priority or quota scale for the grants that come in by year. The SAB has a really phenomenal process of reviewing the grants by primary discipline focus with the SAB member, and then a lot of group discussion that's very much modeled off of the federal grant review process. It's clear, it's concise, there's lots of great debate, but it's really about supporting the highest rigorous science that came in and not any kind of quota or priority by any of the areas. The survey findings for both new investigator and new initiative, as you see here, were very positive. The numbers of investigators that were able to follow up from that early research were able to, both secure external funding, but then, almost 67% published the results of their foundation in scientific journals. For the new initiative awards, again, similar significant external funding to follow. That's both a function of Kaufman, I think, being a great support and hopefully diverse funding to help provide some of this innovative work, but also being a really rigorous process and finding really good scientific and rigorous investigators are doing work in this area too. So combination of those two. We have some really common, frequently asked questions that we've worked to curate. Bree and Brittany worked really hard over this past year to make it much more accessible by area in terms of application or new LOI, or if you have questions in those areas too. There's lots of eligibility questions there. I talked a little bit about institutional indirect costs. Wanted to share with you that allowable budget expenses are all detailed in the description of the grants program itself. So please try to adhere to those. If you have any questions about could this be included or not, or things like that, let us know first before submitting, because I would hate for a budget issue to be something that would really hold up your application because it has rocket science. So let's make sure to be careful about that. And then letters of support. The SAB takes these very, very seriously in their review. We know that, colleagues that are closer to you, chair of your department, they have to write really good letters of support. And they're also probably super authentic and sincere. but make sure to, find people that know your work, have a history of understanding, and can really speak to the specifics of your work versus giving it a thumbs up, saying, hey, hope you take it seriously, but can really chime in on the rigor of what you're providing and the novel nature of the work you're doing as well. Graham, anything to share in terms of eligibility or the questions or letters that you want to chime in on?
No, I think that was clear. I know that there were some um, uh, questions in the chat, which I think have been addressed about sort of exceptions for the period since PhD, and I would just emphasize that um, the foundation's very willing to entertain questions about exceptions and particular circumstances that we understand that people might need to be addressed.
Yeah, I would not hesitate to reach out and ask if you have questions in that area. It is ultimately my decision as I manage the program, but I get lots of outside input. We're really interested in being as inclusive as possible while also keeping parity to the goal and guidelines so that it's fair. So that's all. But we're really good at balancing those as well. Anyone else have any questions or comments before I move on? Great, thanks. Just to let you know, for our team, this is kind of let you know who to contact for really grant submission questions. Best to reach out to, again, Kaufman Apps is the, and Brittany will put that in the chat. So you have the Kaufman Apps email address. Definitely the best place to go. If you have any more specific questions or you want to reach offline, you're happy to do that to me. And you can see where Bree, Carlos, and Brittany fit in this area as well. We are very committed to not having this be simply a transactional grants process. We're interested in building a community of science per Mr. Kaufman's guidelines and his request. We are working towards, again, through a newsletter, through other webinars like this, and then other content information webinars, and then are working towards our first in-person convening since COVID in 2026 as well. So really interested in learning from you. I would say as you interact with us, we're also always in a learning space. So if there are opportunities for improvement that you see or feel that you'd like to share, please don't hesitate to send them to me or give me a call as well. I'm happy to entertain those comments too. And I think that brings us to our question and answer period. How did I do? Oh, that was pretty good. That was time-wise. So I can now see your faces on the screen, or your names and others. So thank you for attending. I couldn't see you before. And Brittany, are there questions in the chat, or people could raise their hand if we'd like to have any questions? And hope this was helpful. I would say if you came to hear something that I didn't cover or we haven't covered, we want to make sure you leave here with that information. So please let us know. Yes, Irene,
Couple of questions.
please.
One is, I know some foundations really want to support research that has like a very clear practical application. So like I do genetics research, something that is very clinically relevant. Others are specifically looking for things that might not immediately meet the NIH's attention. So something much more basic science relation. Others just want something cool and you should just pick a project you think you're really excited about. What's your advice for this one?
Yeah, my advice is that you want to make sure in your application, and I shared with a couple of colleagues that are interdisciplinary, that what you're applying for is considered fundamental chemistry, biology, or intersectional disciplinary. You want that to be a hard Sharpie marker line to Kaufman.
Awesome.
So now it doesn't mean, obviously, 2 steps or 3 steps down the road, this research may have clinical applications in the future, but for what you're doing, what you're proposing, it must meet that sort of fundamental science spit
Great.
test. I don't know how to say it.
Terrific.
So, Graham, any other thoughts?
I would just add that what tends to stand out are proposals that are sort of innovative and new in some way and feel sort of fresh, like, well, there's an idea that's worth exploring. And alongside with that, the the applications and the review tends to be somewhat distinct from the more kind of classic NIH or NSF proposals where, you know, you're expected to provide some evidence that you can actually do what you're proposing to do. For the Kaufman Foundation, there's a greater tolerance of risk, essentially.
Great.
And so having a kind of innovative idea, which seems really good, and if it worked, it would be a home run. But like, you know, it's not a sure bet. That's still that's the kind of innovative proposals that we would like to see and that tend to get funded.
Great. Thank you.
Irene, I would add to that in the beginning of Kaufman, of the program itself, we in general as a program reached out to departments of chemistry, biology, and physics, statewide. We've actually expanded the invite list to clinical departments because we know a lot of fundamental science is happening in those settings as well. I would say it's just, share with some colleagues, but then also in your LOI, help us understand if it might look like or be adjacent to clinical, but it's really fundamental science. Help us understand that, recognize like any review process, they're incredibly skilled people reading it, but they're reading a lot. So I would also say in your LOI materials as well, really not a great idea to just copy and paste your R21 submission and put it in. The more acronyms that we have to look up online to answer questions and others, the harder that is. And this is really meant to be a translatable process. There are people on the review committee that have expertise in all of your areas, and then others that don't. So you want to kind of have it span that area, but the SAB is a really remarkable review process that allows that expertise, insight, building on your expertise to grow, but then a lot of question and answer and learning too. So I hope that's helpful. And we are interested in learning too. So we're, the students of all of you. Sean, please.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the question, Irene.
Hi, I was wondering if you could give some information as to what the expectations for faculty time commitment and salary support are for the grants, especially for the IREG. I know there's not salary support allowed from the grant during the academic term, and so that was just a question that my collaborator and I had in like budgeting what kind of scope for that project we can allocate during the.
Yeah, I mean, so the salary support, given the size of the award and the focus of the award, is largely on the student researchers and in that area as well. And I think for IREG, it doesn't allow for faculty support even off season, but an opportunity to buy equipment or other materials you need to sort of support the science you may not have at your institution that a research tier 1 might have as well.
Yeah.
We haven't really changed those guidelines. We are in the process of revisiting the scope of the awards and the amount of the awards, recognizing the, sort of evolution of grant funding more broadly, but we kind of have a finite cap every year. So if we increase the awards, then we give less grants. And so that's something that the board of directors will be talking about this year as well. Graham, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that as it's come up in the past, but there hasn't been, a flexibility of like switching out one category for another. It's just one of the core guidelines of not having faculty support for that. Recognizing that hopefully from a tier 2 institution that salary is covered, but I know it's often on a 9-month appointment. So that is a trade-off.
Yeah, I guess the one thing we wanted to think about was like, do we need to make sure that any faculty dependent activities that we're proposing like need to be within the scope of our course prep or teaching responsibilities we have during the course of a review that are during the course of the normal academic term that are like covered by our normal salaries, or if there's like mentorship that we would do as part of this project that would be above and beyond.
I see what you mean.
Yeah.
So if you're working with 4 or 5 students in a really intense way, would that be different? I don't think we've had that question before. I'd say that probably the scenario you described first in your normal course of action, but an opportunity to really cultivate a cohort of students to work with and maybe have a more in-depth exposure to the science and work in your area and maybe working again with other colleagues. So I'd say probably, again, we're in the space of brainstorming. So you're happy to challenge our system. That's great too. But I would probably say keeping in line with your traditional scope of work, but providing the alternate support that you might need to really meaningfully engage students in that. That can also be for conference, attendance or registration, things like that. They may not have the opportunity to participate in as well. I'm sure that your conference would be covered there too, but we could talk about those details. But not salary support to offset, say you're doing 10% more mentoring, that would probably be hard to justify at scale.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for the question. That's a really good one. And just, we take all these in and we bring them back to the board and say, what should we be thinking about that? So please feel free to share other ideas, especially if that was somehow a major hindrance to you implementing or applying to the IREG program.
Michael,
Anna, please. Oh, yes.
I'd like to address a question in the chat.
Yes.
Before we get to Anna, this question was submitted a little bit before her hand, regarding consultancy. I believe the answer is a no, but if you can review and just confirm, that would be excellent.
Oh, I didn't look at the chat then, sorry. I wasn't looking. And the question from
Elena.
Yeah, it's me. I can elaborate actually. So we
please,
have
yeah.
we have a project in mind where there is a partner in who is a clinician primarily, but she has an affiliation with an institution like with a university, with a research university, but she doesn't have a primary tenure track or tenured appointment. The primary appointment is as a clinician, but she's doing research. She has papers. Now, we need that person to get some data for us. The question is, is there a mechanism for us to send money to that institution so somebody can be hired, a technician can be hired to take that data, or we can just find a way to get that done differently?
Graham, I don't know if you want to start, if you want me to. So on the consultancy side, there have been examples where a consultant has been hired to provide very specific bookend services that the institution does not currently have, and it's really necessary for the research. Some people have tried to use it, in a really wonderful way as a Trojan horse to get another investigator involved that's in another state, and that's, not possible, right, for that side. So for a consultant that doesn't have the tenure stream of it, that should be fine because they're not actually one of the investigators meeting that criteria. But I think this is for new investigator or new initiative?
No, this is for new initiative.
For new initiative.
Yes, and the institution is within Pennsylvania. It's just the researcher who
doesn't have an appointment. Yeah.
Yes, that's the problem.
Yeah.
We could find somebody, let's say a supervisor of her, let's say, who would have a primary appointment as a researcher, but that would be basically to circumvent the rule in a way. The real person who would have the know-how would be the person who has the clinician appointment.
Well, and again, for the consultant, since they're not an investigator on the award, they don't necessarily have to have the same level of appointment.
Okay.
We have had in some examples where a consultant's been hired to do a particular level of statistical analysis that's needed in a unique area that's really, a critical step to it, but not part of the research team, not part of the work more broadly.
Okay. So we can proceed, but we have to justify in the budget that this budget item will be for getting this data.
I would, be as explicit and clear as possible.
Excellent. Okay, thank you very much.
Anyone have a different idea on my team? Okay, I got a thumbs up from Graham, which is always a good sign. So that's good. Thanks for the question. Anna, please.
Hi, I'm really excited to apply for the New Investigators Award.
Thanks for attending. Thanks for applying.
And given my not as much of experience, as well as noticing how this Kaufman offers a unique opportunity that's probably a little different from NSF or NIH, those nature. Do you mind sharing a little bit more about what would the successful LOI would look like in terms of helping SAB to really understand the importance and nature and scope of it, what you're looking for versus what you're not looking for? Definitely not many acronyms, but like if you can share a little bit about what you would love to see, what helpful or what is not helpful for the SAB to read a LOI to best way
Sure.
to, differentiate different proposals.
Yeah, I mean, I would think about the audience, right? So that's a good place to start. You'll have people who have, deep expertise in the areas of chemistry, physics, and biology and interdisciplinary fields. They also have an incredible relationship and history of working together where they will chime in on their areas of expertise. But so if you have a biology application and a physicist reading it, it may not be their expert area of research. They're reading it for comprehension. Are they getting out of that? What is the work that's proposing? What is the novel nature of the work that you're proposing? What is the gap you're looking to fill? And how are you and or the proposed research uniquely positioned to do that as well? You want to think about it in a way that you might be able to read to your, family member at a holiday dinner, and they might be able to kind of get the gist of it, but maybe not all the, deep details. Sometimes a picture can be worth 1,000 words, but only if it connects to the text. But the picture itself can't be expected to kind of tell the full story. But I'll let Graham, because he's, sort of in the position here where he reads many of these at the same time. So Graham, if you have any higher level thoughts on that as well. And I would also, before I move on, I would say, for us on our side being, we're all scientists also, but now in a grants management phase, you want to always be thinking of what is the Kaufman criteria for funding? What are the priorities in terms of work? And can we draw a thick line to it? Because it's a very competitive program. So you want to be able to say, no, like I get it. They've answered it. It's not silly to use the words in our application materials to answer your question. That's just always really good, because then we know we can check our boxes and really learn from you as well. If we have to go, hunting, like a jigsaw puzzle, that's always trouble. But Graham, sorry.
No, I think you've captured the main points, Michael. It's if an SAB member is sitting down and reading your LOI and has a relatively modest period of time to read that and to digest it, because there's many, right? You just need to have a clear and compelling, innovative, interesting story or question, right? And it's not about the details. It just isn't. And if you have a good, innovative, interesting idea, it's likely to fare well. If it is a question that is of interest, but only to you and not to everybody else, then if it's focused on organic chemistry and there's an astrophysicist on the SAB reviewing it and just can't get past the first sentence, that's going to have a very short history as a proposal. So I would just emphasize that it has to be broadly positioned. It doesn't have to be and shouldn't be over complex. And you should make a case. You should take the one page. You should take advantage of having the one page to present the best case possible for why your proposal should be funded. And you want to make it readable, interesting, innovative, different. Those are the kinds of LOIs that are going to rise to the top.
Yeah.
Can
I say this to you. Oh, please go ahead.
I have a quick comment. I really, really appreciated the examples the website shares for 2004 and recent ones where you guys added SAB decide to fund this because of, I found that to be really helpful as compared to some of the older ones where it's more like just abstract of what they applied for.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, and just keep in mind that the SAB is not a group of people that are going like this. Like there's tons of discussion and understanding and lots of learning that's happening in that space also. One of the hardest parts of the work, working on this side and as a recovering academic myself, is, really strong proposals that, are matched by other really strong proposals. So should you not be funded, it's an opportunity to take the feedback. If you are invited for a full proposal and not funded, to take the feedback from the SAB. We do provide feedback at the proposal phase. We don't do it at the LOI phase, unfortunately, just because there are so many. That's really difficult to do. But then to reapply, right? Because it's just part of that process of making it clear and concise as well. So thank you for being part of this learning process with us too.
And Michael, if I can just add briefly, here's another way of thinking about it. you've got this SAB with a broad range of expertise, some of whom will have much closer knowledge of what you're proposing. You need to present those SAB members the arguments that they can use to persuade everybody else on the SAB that this is really worthy, right? And because, as Michael said, that's the process. We discuss, argue, fight, debate, challenge each other to understand what's being proposed. And if you don't help us argue for your proposal, then it's very hard to get the buy-in for that. And so that's another way of thinking about how to put it together. Be clear and open about why you think this is the most interesting proposal that should be funded.
I love that. Thank you, Graham, for sharing that as well. And just so you know that in your assignment process that Carlos really helps organize and we work on as a team is there will be someone with your disciplinary expertise that is your primary reviewer. There's also an assigned secondary reviewer and a tertiary reviewer. But for the full proposal phase, it's expected that all the SAB members review each one of those proposals as well. So as Graham mentioned, someone's going to present your proposal, like happens in NIH reviews and others, as a comment and their recommendation. We do have scores beforehand, but the scores often change as part of the broader discussion and to look at the grants that all encompass to each other, given the funding guidelines that we have available and the funding we have at hand that year. So hopefully that's helpful. It is a bit sales, right? So you want to get your elevator pitch in, but also recognizing that everyone's doing great work. So this is not a reflection of the work, it's kind of alignment with the Kaufman program too. Thank you for that question. Thank you, Graham, for the details. Any other questions for us today or for anyone else on the team? Anyone on spring break right now? I know it's like spring break season. Oh, you are? Oh, good. Okay. Hope you're headed, hope it's warm or you're doing something fun for spring break. We don't have spring break, but although Brittany and Bree are going out of town next week, so they're going to be on vacation. Any other questions? If not, I want to be really respectful of your time. I'm often a slow marinator, so I'll like hang up the line and be like, oh God, I forgot that question. If you have that, just send it to Kaufman Apps. We'll make sure to triage it among our team and get back to you right away. Should, in some rare case, you send a note and you don't hear back in a couple of days, send it again. It very rarely will fall through our cracks, but we work, I was a bartender for a long time too. So we want to make sure you get the information you need as quickly as you need and as effective. If we don't know the answer, I'll tell you we don't know it either. Thank you, Taryn, for putting the email in the chat. And oh yes, Casey, please.
Yeah, sorry, I just have one quick question. So I had asked about submitting multiple LOIs for IREG and Brittany, you answered me. I was just looking on the IREG guidelines and it says applicants can also submit an LOI to the foundation's other research grant opportunities, but only one proposal will be funded. So I was just curious how that might play out.
Brittany, you want to take it? Yeah.
So you can submit as a PI once, whether that's for IREG or new investors. So if you are on another submission as a co-investigator, so for example, if you are on a new initiative proposal as a co-investigator, that's permissible.
Gotcha.
But again, even if you were a co-investigator in some of these things, you as a researcher are only getting funded once.
Right. Okay.
Potentially.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying.
And Casey, something else along that, and then Anna, I'll get to you, is we also have other grants programs at the Pittsburgh Foundation that are unrelated to Kaufman. We've often had people say, well, if I have funding from one area, can I not apply to your equity and social justice work, which is not common here, but we let people know that this does not make you ineligible for applying to other spaces at the foundation. This does not compete with those areas.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Anna, please.
In part of the LOI, we are asked to attach a publication most relevant to the work. I'm assuming that's for the credibility and ability to carry the proposed work. Is it worth mentioning a few sentences in the LOI if you don't have a publication directly relates to it, but you do have credible experience and other things? Is it worth mentioning it at OI, or is it like critical part of passing to the next proposal phase, or not so much at the moment of LOI phase?
Yeah, I mean, Graham, were you gonna say something?
Well, no, just I think that so first and foremost, any any sort of sense that your proposal is, you know, not quite aligned with the requirements or whatever, then you really want to address that in your LOI. It's you just want to address it. Now, I think that in terms of publications, our expectation, given the focus of the Kaufman Foundation, is that an investigator probably would have some publications in that general area. But if you can make an argument that there is some other evidence of, you know, work in that area, familiarity or whatever, then by all means, you know, say that. Or if you have no publications relevant in that area, you know, you can say, I don't have publications. This is a new area of research for me, but I have expertise in this area, this area, and those areas of expertise will enable me to move forward with the proposed project, right? And so it depends on the particular circumstances, but as long as you can present a clear case so that the SAB can understand it, then that's helpful.
Yeah, I think I was just going to say the same thing as well. And if you do put other publications in, because you'd want to be able to show that you've had, you know, academic success in that area, you know, in terms of publishing, you can put that in. But it's great to, as anyone who's been reviewing grants in the past, right? You want to always have that question in your head, and the next sentence you read in the LOI answers that question, right, for you. So you'd want to, just as Graham said, be able to answer that question, and then, you know, be able to say, you know, I haven't published, but I have 6 papers in review, and I'm a new investigator and have these things, and this is a new area, and I wake up every night at 3:30 in the morning thinking about this. I know it's the most innovative work that has to happen, and so do it. So just answer the question in the LOI best you can.
Thank you.
Molly, please.
Hi.
Hi.
Sorry for sort of a late question. I'm one of those ponderers, but I was just
You're well within the time frame. Take your time.
on a comment made very early on, just about the sort of, you know, focus on fundamental science, and I've just been wrestling in my head here, thinking about, like, a lot of times we're asked to sort of explain in other grant pitches sort of the framing or like the motivation behind the work being like rooted in a real world problem, or I don't know, for some context, I do infectious disease related work, not in humans, in wildlife and microbial interactions. And I'm just wondering that balance of, like, does, you know, for the Kaufman Foundation, is it that we sort of want to restructure sort of the into the research such that it's not, because I think of those sort of real world connections being potential, they're the things that draw these connections to potential applications and applied science, and that seems to be less emphasized here. And so I don't know if that makes sense, thinking about how is it like counterproductive to be framing things in the context of like real world problems, if that makes sense.
I'll start by saying that in the LOI, and given the focus of Kaufman, you have a limited amount of real estate to invest. So I wouldn't spend 2 paragraphs talking about the application. A really good example, I think, here is that we had an applicant 2 years ago that was a physicist and a textile expert. I don't know what the word is. What am I thinking of? A textilist that was amazing, that proposed some really amazing physics-based fundamental science questions that could relate to invisible planes someday. They spent 1 line talking about the application, and then they talked about the science that they were proposing and why it was novel and creative. And they really needed the new initiative award because they couldn't get the kind of support they needed to have that kind of exploratory space. So I would say just make it proportional on, you know, where the Kaufman focus is. If you feel like people would interpret this, what you're proposing, as being pretty clinical or, you know, applied, then you want to make sure to address that head on and say, this might seem, but it isn't for these reasons, so that they can help understand that as well. But Graham or anyone else?
So one of the hallmarks of fundamental curiosity-driven science is that the impact is in multiple areas, often many areas, right? And so it may improve the size of rhino herds or something or other. But if that's all it does, then that's kind of really limited impact, right? And so if you think about it like that, you can either propose, you know, some fundamental to understand some fundamental aspects of microbial ecology, or you can propose it to save the elephants, right? And if you propose it to save the elephants, as laudable as that is, it's going to rank lower than if you propose to understand microbial dynamics, which may end up saving the elephants, but it could be relevant in lots of other to other issues and problems. And so it's a, you know, it's a little bit of a knack to get it right, but the emphasis is to focus on the question being fundamental curiosity-driven science. But that doesn't mean that it should be irrelevant, right? And Charles Kaufman talked very specifically about fundamental science that is transformative, you know, and we often think about this context. If you look at who wins Nobel Prizes, they sometimes are for a very particular type of addressing a particular type of disease, you know, treating malaria, but much of it is in the basic aspects of understanding how transcription works, for example, right? And so if you think about it in those kinds of guidelines, I think that's probably the most helpful thing you can do. If you propose to find a cure for Alzheimer's, it won't get funded. If you propose to understand the fundamental molecular biology of abnormal lipid deposition or something, then that's much more likely to be funded.
Thanks.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Thank you, Graham.
Question.
Yeah, really good question. And it's also, Molly, that just comes up all the time. And as you start writing, this is really, it's a good place to ask some colleagues who are skeptics, right? To kind of just take a look at it and say, you know, could you look at this as well? Or read it out loud walking down the hall and just thinking about, you know, just Graham's description was perfect. So any other questions for us today? This is the second of the two webinars that we had. They're both the same, except this one we did provide information about the IREG program. So that's good because we should have done that in the first one. They will be recorded and posted online, so you'll have those as well. You do have lots of information from our FAQ page, but again, we're always in a learning space with you, so help us understand. We are neck deep in the LOI proposal, LOI submission phase. When are LOIs due, Brittany?
The 28th of March at 5 p.m.
At 5 p.m. So I would just always recommend, like any annoying foundation person, don't submit it at 4:43 because like something's not going to work, and we just want to make sure to get it in. So try to get it in there the day before. We're happy to work with you in all ways and help you with your submission. And anyone else from the team have a comment before we go? Enjoy the sun wherever you are. It's pretty sunny here in Pittsburgh today, which is welcomed. And thank you so much for your interest. Mr. Kaufman was a remarkable visionary. It's really a gift to be able to see his donor intent through, and we look forward to seeing your materials. Graham, Dr. Hatfield, Graham, thank you so much. And for the Pittsburgh Foundation team, and Carlos, thanks for everything.
Thank you.
Be safe,
Thanks.
everyone.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everybody.
Bye-bye.